Well, you may not have known this, but there are some people who feel we just don't have enough information to understand what's happening to our money. They say we're financially illiterate. The time and technology have passed us by, and as a result, as a society, we're losing millions. Tonight, an effort to change that. Patty Croft is an economic analyst and former senior banker. Jim Stanford is an economist with Unifor. Preet Banerjee is a financial advisor and freelance journalist, and Amanda Lang is our senior business correspondent. Their thoughts in a moment, but first this. Okay, smarty pants, answer this. Who insures stocks in the stock market? There are 4 possible answers. Want to try another one? Fine, try this. By using unit pricing in the grocery store, you can easily compare the cost of any brand and any package size. True or false? Well, however you did, not a lot of Canadians did that well when the full test, 14 questions on financial literacy, was conducted in 2011. The average score, 67%. That's a C. What does that mean? Maybe that the financial world is so complex that many of us just aren't staying on top of what we need to know. For some, it may be too late, but not for our kids and grandkids. How our schools and universities are prepping graduates to approach money, financial services, and how they spend is critical to their long-term sustainability and perhaps to their family legacy. I mean, listen to this. Boomers stand to inherit $1 trillion over the next 20 years, but most will lose it. Estimates suggest 70% of families lose their money within a generation of inheriting it, 90% by the 3rd generation. We're in a new era of money, but many of us don't understand how to handle it. That raises lots of questions, so let's get at it. All right, if we're getting a C grade, what is it about our money that we don't know that we should know? Patty.
Well, I think we need to fess up to what we don't know, because it turns out that people overestimate their financial literacy, like we're all good drivers. The OECD did a study in Australia, and they asked people to do a simple question with compound interest, and 68% said they wouldn't be able to do it, but the actual results, only 1 out of 4 got it right. So I think the thing you need to know is you control your money. Your money does not control you, but you need financial tools to do that.
Jim.
Well, we obviously, Peter, need to know how to manage our money prudently. On the other hand, I also think we need to know where this problem came from. Where does money itself come from? We operate in a credit money system, and most money is not printed by the government. It's created by private banks when they issue a loan. And that, in fact, is the engine that drives this whole credit system. So when we're teaching people to be careful with credit and borrowing and indebtedness, I think it's good to understand where that push comes from, the profit motive of the industry. Same with this whole thing about investing in stocks. Why should the average person have to be able to pick the right stocks? We need to understand kind of the motivation behind this hyper-financialized world that we're confronted with. If we're forewarned on that, maybe we'll be forearmed a bit.
Preet, what is it we don't know?
You know, I go to the very basics, the dichotomy between responsible borrowing versus irresponsible borrowing. So responsible borrowing would be borrowing for assets that appreciate, for example, a house. You start out with a large asset and a large debt, but hopefully you end up with a larger asset and no debt. Or investing in education increases your lifetime earnings. So that would be responsible borrowing. Irresponsible borrowing would be for things like depreciating assets, like a vacation, cars, et cetera. And for me, that's a telltale sign that you can't afford it. If you don't have the money and you have to borrow it, that means that you can't afford it. So there's that dichotomy. It's a very basic understanding, but if more people knew that, I think they'd be better off.
Amanda.
I think the most important thing is a simple understanding that the money that you earn isn't just for your present-day self, it's for your future self. And I think our understanding of that is weak because there was a time not that long ago when you were working, your company was saving for you. Your pension was part of your benefit. You could count on that income sort of being spread out over your lifetime. Most Canadians can't anymore. So it's on us. Unless we can change that fact, we now have to say, I can go to the movie today. I should put that same amount away to go to the movie when I'm 65. Because if that's what I want to do, that's got to be my plan. And we don't really think that way.
And I agree with that. But I also think we've got to ask, why is it? Why have we organized things this way, that this is how people are going to have to save for their pension? Because the international experience is that's a terrible way to successfully save for people's pensions. So I think there's that broader dimension behind it.
What happens when we don't know this stuff?
Well, a lot of bad things can happen, Peter. And it turns out if we look at financial literacy, it's like an upside-down U in terms of the age breakdown. So the young people and the old people are the least financially literate and the most at risk. So it's not surprising the new federal strategy is directed at the young and the old, because the young can get into a lot of trouble, of course, too much debt, too much credit card use at a very young age sets you off on a very rough road. And it turns out that financial transactions are interrelated. So the same people that pay the minimum amount of the credit card are the same people that use other very expensive forms of borrowing. So the youth are at risk, but so are the seniors. And one of the primary risks there is fraud, that if you're not financially literate, you are subject to fraud.
Great.
There's this silent danger. So if someone is 64 and they haven't saved for retirement and they're not part of a pension plan, in my experience, when they get to 65, it doesn't gut them that they're not able to retire and have an ideal lifestyle. They kind of knew that. So there's that lost potential that isn't there. If you ask someone who's 65, who's in that situation, what would you tell your 20-year-old or 30-year-old self? They tell you all the things that, sort of Amanda highlighted. And to echo Patty's point, especially when it comes to seniors, this fraud and catfishing of seniors. So as you're older, you're more likely to be single for various reasons. You go online dating, and it's an old scam repackaged with technology. But someone can, persuade you to give them money, wine and dine you. It's that handsome grandpa with the perfect hair and teeth and whatnot, tells you everything you want to hear. And it says, oh, I'm in Mexico and I need $20,000, and you never hear from them ever again. So that's a real risk that is actually growing.
We talk about how technology has changed everything. How has technology changed our financial knowledge?
Well, I think in a few ways. Information is readily available. So just about everybody has a way to find this stuff out, and in really digestible ways. So not knowing is not really, there's not much excuse. Technology is also actually making our investments way cheaper. Easier to do. Over time, the cost of them will come way down. And to Jim's point, should people be investing their own money? Is that right? I would say it's the way it is right now. So don't give up most of your returns in fees. And we do right now. Many people think they're doing the right thing, and they buy something that's very costly over the long term, and they've got no hope of actually earning much on it. Technology is helping solve that problem, whether the industry likes it or not.
Jim?
Well, it opens up certainly some opportunities. You can get your information even about your own money so much more easily, with online statements and that kind of thing, if you have the motivation and the time to pay that much attention. But it certainly opens up a lot of risks. Before email came along, Peter, I never got approached by deposed royalty in Nigeria to invest in.
I thought they were only talking to me.
I think they're talking to everybody.
Preet, you wanted to make a point there?
Yeah, there's a risk, because I agree. There's a lot of great uses and benefits of technology, but at the same time, there are people who want to do all these things themselves because they're empowered to do that. Right. And they only tend to focus on what they think is the sexy stuff, like investing. And they're forgetting about the basics of insurance, about estate planning, et cetera, and that's a real risk.
We place so much faith in technology that sometimes you have to pull back and do is there like too much faith? The sort of Dr. Google effect that you're going to the wrong places for the kind of information we need?
Absolutely. I think it's overwhelming, the amount of information that's out there, be it websites, webinars, podcasts, apps. There's so much information. So do your research, but maybe do the sober second thought. In other words, you're not an expert necessarily in budgeting or finance or investing, but go talk to someone who is, such as a banker or a certified financial planner, to get that second opinion. So don't just go down the rabbit hole in naivety.
And most of the information has some kind of promotional mentality behind it as well. So the information that shows how if you pay yourself first, you'll be a millionaire by the time you're 56.
No, I think that's
There's
a
whole
point.
Profit motive behind that we have to be skeptical.
Right, you've got to go to independent sources.
I was
going to
add one of the places we can educate ourselves the most, and I mean, even people who consider themselves financially literate, is understanding there are conflicts everywhere. If somebody's giving you a mortgage, they get a bonus based on selling you the mortgage. So they've got a conflict in the question of whether you should have it or not, and it's just good to know. I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong going on, but it's important to know that these are people making a living selling you products.
How have things changed in, say, the last generation? I mean, how our money works for us. Has it changed considerably in a generation?
Well, money itself has obviously changed. Cash is largely on its way out. We hold much less cash than we used to. Plastic may be on its way out, with some of these new transfer systems and using your phone as your wallet and so on. So, again, there's a mixture of good things and bad things about that. There's convenience, obviously. In some ways, it can be safer than carrying money around in your wallet. In other ways, it opens up new potential for theft, for scams, for believing that I can be the master of the universe, like I saw in the Wall Street movie. when in reality it doesn't work that way.
Patty?
Well, I think one thing that hasn't changed is our relationship with money. I think your relationship with money is very unique and very personal, and I think a lot of it is formulated by the way you grew up. I mean, when I grew up, we didn't talk about money. It was rude to ask someone how much they earned. And all I knew is that my dad spent too much, and as a result, my mother couldn't. But I think that today, people are a lot more open about money. And I love this notion of a family sitting down and saying, okay, here's how much money is coming in. Here's how we are choosing to spend it. Money is finite. It does not grow on trees. These are the choices that we're making. Share with your teenagers the mistakes that you made along the way in terms of finances. So I think that that's a good change that's happening.
Yeah, I remember, in the old front page challenge when Gordon Sinclair, you always ask that question, how much do you make? And people would, this was
rude.
outrageous.
Yeah.
How can you possibly ask that question? Do our kids know more or less than we do about money?
Well, I was part of a series of financial literacy workshops recently for kids 18 to 24, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions. So one of the exercises that we did was to create a sample budget. So we created a fictitious 25-year-old, just graduated, living for the first time away from home, and asked them, what are the things you have to spend money on, what do they cost? So they determined that a condo rental in Toronto was $400 a month, and one person said, no, that's crazy. Should be 500. And the other thing they determined they had to spend money on was a new work wardrobe because they'd been in school, they didn't have a proper work wardrobe. So the first year you're going to spend a lot on clothing. How much? 40 grand. Now, these are extreme examples.
Well, they were looking at you, Preet.
But I think the issue is it's not that they're not intelligent, because a lot of these kids actually had a deep understanding of corporate finance, but very little understanding of personal finance. So it's a matter of exposing them to this information in the first place. That's what we're not doing.
Well, so I would actually take a different approach, and that is, I've said this before, and I mean, cast no aspersions, but the boomer generation was a lucky one. There were the liberalization of capital markets at a time when the globe was globalizing and economies were growing, and if you weren't a dope, you got wealthier. And so they did, but we haven't passed on good models to our children about saving and being thoughtful. We're actually not, boomers aren't savers. And so there's a whole generation that kind of thinks it just comes easily. And you marry that with the fact that most of them aren't going to have a company pension, and they may not have a government pension that's going to do much for them. And we better get this message across to the younger the better, because it may be on them.
Who should be teaching us about this? Or is it all about self-education, or does government have a role here? Or where should the teaching be coming from?
I think schools are a good place to start, Peter. That's where we learn most stuff in life, and we have to do it in an organized, systematic way, a universal way through our schools. And we have to be careful about it. I don't want to see schools teaching a course again and play the markets and simulate as if, you picked the right stocks. And so on. We need a systematic, comprehensive overview of finance, of the economy, of the labor market, of our pension system, for example. Every student should be learning about the Canada Pension Plan and where it came from and how it's financed and how important it is. That kind of an approach in schools would be a great start.
Patty?
I think that would be good, but we have to make it interesting and fun and relevant for kids. Like, I can't see them paying a lot of attention to a lecture on the Canada Pension Plan, but I think we need to have Pixar or Xbox.
Even if, like Jim gave it?
Yeah, I could dress up.
Maybe
like
if Jim
Just have to put it into a Minecraft game, and it'll be good.
So I think that's a challenge. I agree with you that it's all about education. The younger, the better, but it has to be useful, like budgeting, just simple budgeting. I agree with you. Wealth management, that's later down the road. But I think so many kids who graduate from high school don't understand how to budget. But I think we also have to be educated at home. I talked about the role of the family, but as parents, your job is to be a role model. So why not be a money role model? And again, have that open dialogue. Take away the mystique. This is not rocket science. It's very basic stuff, but pass it on to your kids.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll ask this question. If we improve our financial literacy, will that be enough to prevent, let's say, another financial meltdown? Welcome back to The Bottom Line. This week on the next generation of money. Patty, Jim, Preet, and Amanda are all at the table tonight. I think you can make the argument that the financial illiteracy led to the last financial meltdown. So if we become more financially literate, is that going to prevent the next one? Amanda.
I think it's clear that in certain ways, absolutely. I mean, you take your own mortgage, for example. Not everybody realizes that a 1% move in interest rates can be a 10% increase in your mortgage payment. which is a kind of a sizable thing. And if you don't know that about your own mortgage, you're not really empowering yourself to know how much house you can afford, how big a loan you should have. You kind of take that up a level to what sort of activities are going on out there by the banks and by, in the stock market. And ignorance is not your friend. It actually keeps us from making policy that's accountable.
Preet?
I think you need governments to instill regulators that have teeth and that enforce regulations. Otherwise, while not morally acceptable, from a risk-return perspective, white-collar crime pays because the returns are tremendous and the risks are gutless. Or sorry, the punishments are gutless, I should say.
Right. Jim?
And Peter, not only would literacy not prevent the next meltdown, if we think it will, that's going to hasten the next meltdown. Really, if we think a buyer beware approach is going to prevent the leveraged speculation from the private financial industry, the most sophisticated minds in the world, those were the people who invented this stuff. Yeah. And it was Jim Flaherty who made the link between financial literacy and the meltdown. He's the one who announced this whole strategy that came up with the report in 2009. And I think that is exactly the wrong reason to learn financial literacy. We need to have a structure, we need to have regulations, we need to have protections, because you'll always find people who jump on the next bandwagon, and you'll always have incredibly creative people in the financial industry who'll invent that next bandwagon.
But I think financial literacy would help people in the midst of the meltdown, because so many people got scared, took all their money out of the stock market at exactly the wrong time. And if they were financially literate, they would have that rainy day fund, 3 months of savings that would help them in case they lost their job. So I think it would not prevent, but it would certainly help the average Canadian deal with the financial meltdown in a much better way.
It doesn't stop you from losing your job, which was the key problem.
I think if citizens knew more, though, we could hold people accountable. I mean, you're right. There's an imbalance of power, but you would at least hold the policymakers and politicians accountable for what happens.
I agree with that completely.
All right. I only got a minute left. Give me one thing that if you could teach it to help the situation, you would. Free.
Well, I think with financial literacy, you need a JIT delivery, just-in-time delivery. So, for example, if you have a child and you want to teach them the basics about money management, you're doing groceries, give them $10, $20, say you're in charge of the snacks. It's up to you how to spend that. You better make sure it lasts 7 days, because if it doesn't, then you've got snacks for 2 days and then you're on your own. You have to let them fail if they choose that. They have to feel the consequences.
Amanda.
I mean, it's the same thing. I beat this drum, but every dollar you earn, you share with your future self. So how long does that future self need a portion of that dollar, and figure out what you need to save today?
Patty.
Go back to what I said at the beginning, is that you control your money. Your money does not control you, and your money is finite. And wealth management, hire a professional, but you have to figure out budgeting. It's pretty simple stuff, but get it right and you're set for life.
I think we need to teach that power dimension of money in addition to the dollars and cents. It's often poor communities, marginalized communities, who we really want to have the financial literacy aimed at, and to motivate them to learn more. If they understand that they're the victims of an unfair, profit-driven system, they'll get the collective motivation to do something about it and empower themselves.
All right. Good discussion. Lots of good advice. Thank you all.